The sound of chains echoes louder than drums of war. The scent of blood, thicker than smoke on the battlefield. And one name, feared by kings, whispered by rebels, burned into history. William Wallace. Outlaw, warrior, patriot, legend. He didn't come from a throne. He came from the dirt, and with nothing but courage. He brought an empire to its knees. But the crown didn't just want him dead. They wanted to erase him, break him, tear his name from the hearts of men. This is the story they didn't want you to remember. And once you hear how he died, you'll never forget who he was. To understand the horror of Wallace's death, we must first understand why he was considered such a profound threat to King Edward I of England, often called Longshanks. By the late 13th century, Scotland was in a precarious position. Following the death of King Alexander III, a succession crisis had plunged the nation into uncertainty. Edward I, seeing an opportunity, asserted his overlordship, essentially treating Scotland as a vassal state. He installed his own puppet king, John Balliol, and began to impose English law, customs, and taxes with an iron fist. The Scottish nobility, divided and often self-serving, offered little resistance. But from this oppression, a beacon emerged, a commoner, a knight of modest means, William Wallace. Unlike the squabbling nobles, Wallace's motivation was pure, the absolute freedom of Scotland from English tyranny. His rise was meteoric, from a local skirmish to the astounding victory at Stirling Bridge in 1297, where he, alongside Andrew Moray, decimated a far larger English army. Wallace proved to be a military genius and an inspirational leader. He became guardian of Scotland, a de facto ruler, and for a brief, glorious period, he expelled the English from Scottish soil. This was not just a rebellion, it was an existential threat to Edward's vision of a unified Great Britain under his crown. Wallace wasn't fighting for a particular king or noble, he was fighting for Scotland itself. And that made him uniquely dangerous. However, he was tragically short-lived. The very next year, 1298, he faced Edward I himself at the Battle of Falkirk. The English, with their superior longbowmen and cavalry, inflicted a devastating defeat. Though he escaped, his reputation was wounded. He resigned as guardian of Scotland shortly after. For 7 years, Wallace became a shadow. He traveled Europe, seeking aid from France and the Pope. But the fire of rebellion back home dimmed. And then, in 1305, it happened. Near Glasgow, Wallace was finally betrayed. The exact details are debated, but it's widely believed he was handed over to English authorities by Sir John Menteith, a Scottish knight loyal to Edward. The price of betrayal was high, but for Menteith, the rewards from the English crown were undoubtedly greater. Brought to London in chains, Wallace stood before a rigged court at Westminster Hall. He was charged with treason, but Wallace stood tall and delivered the words that still echo through history. Greater than, I could not be a traitor, for I owe Edward no allegiance. He didn't recognize England's rule over Scotland. He was no traitor, he was a patriot. But such arguments fell on deaf ears. The verdict was predetermined. Edward I wanted not just Wallace's death, but the complete annihilation of his legacy, a warning to any Scot who dared to dream of independence. August 23, 1305, one of the darkest days in Scottish history. And now, we come to the part of Wallace's story that is as infamous as his life itself. The sentence handed down by Edward I was the most brutal and agonizing form of execution known in medieval England: hanged, drawn, and quartered. Let me describe this in detail, as it reveals the absolute terror Edward intended to instill. First, Wallace was to be hanged. He was dragged through the streets of London, tied to a horse's tail, a final public humiliation. Then, at the Elms at Smithfield, he was strung up by the neck. But not until death. The rope was cut while he was still alive, still conscious, but now in immense pain, slowly suffocating. Next, he was drawn. While still alive, his body was laid out, his abdomen was slit open, and his intestines and other internal organs were pulled out, drawn, from his body, and burned before his very eyes. Imagine the agony, the incomprehensible horror of witnessing your own body dismembered, your life force literally spilling out of you. This act was designed to inflict maximum suffering and dishonor, as the entrails were considered the seat of a person's courage and spirit. Finally, he was quartered. After this unimaginable torture, While he may or may not have still been alive, his body was beheaded. Then, his corpse was cut into 4 separate pieces, quartered. But the horror did not end there. The severed head of William Wallace was impaled on a pike and displayed on London Bridge, a gruesome trophy, a stark warning to all who passed. His 4 quarters were then sent to the 4 corners of England and Scotland, to Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, and Stirling, the very places where his defiance had been most potent. This was a deliberate, calculated act of psychological warfare. His body, fragmented and scattered, was meant to symbolize the breaking of Scottish resistance, the absolute futility of opposing English rule. The message was clear: defy Edward I, and this will be your fate. Your body will be dishonored, your spirit annihilated, and your memory erased from history. Edward I intended Wallace's death to be the final word on Scottish independence. He wanted to break their will, to crush their spirit beyond repair. But he miscalculated, terribly. Instead of extinguishing the flame of freedom, Wallace's brutal execution ignited it into an inferno. The horror of his death, the indignity inflicted upon him, did not terrify the Scots into submission. It galvanized them. It turned William Wallace, the commoner hero, into William Wallace, the immortal martyr. His sacrifice became a rallying cry. Within months, a new champion arose. Robert the Bruce, a nobleman who had initially wavered in his loyalty to Scotland, but who now, inspired by Wallace's ultimate sacrifice, took up the mantle of resistance. Bruce would go on to defeat the English at Bannockburn in 1314, securing Scotland's independence. Wallace's death, designed as a deterrent, became the single greatest inspiration for Scottish nationhood. His name, instead of being erased, was forever etched into the heart of Scotland. He became the ultimate symbol of resistance against tyranny, a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable cruelty, the human spirit's desire for freedom can never truly be extinguished. His story, though ending in tragedy and horror, is ultimately a testament to the enduring power of courage, conviction, and the unbreakable spirit of a people fighting for their right to exist. William Wallace never saw a free Scotland, but his agonizing sacrifice ensured that one day it would be. He died a criminal in the eyes of his oppressors, but he was resurrected as an eternal hero in the hearts of his countrymen. His story reminds us that freedom often comes at an unimaginable cost, and that the echoes of courage, even from centuries past, can still inspire us today. If this story moved you, remember, history is not just about dates and battles. It's about people who dared to stand, even when it cost them everything. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. And drop your thoughts in the comments. Was William Wallace a hero, or a dangerous rebel? Let's see how many of you dared to take a side. Until next time, see you again.